Okay, hello everybody. This is chapter 14, the heart and heart disease, and let's get started. Okay, what we'll be looking at in this chapter is the structure of the heart, the layers, the division, and as well as how blood is supplied to the heart as well as to the entire system of the body. What the functions of the heart are in terms of the cardiac cycle, its output, and the conduction system, how heart rate is controlled, and the abnormal and normal heart sounds that you'll find. I am going to omit the different types of heart studies, diseases, treatment, as well as aging. So some of the key terms. So in terms of the structure of the heart, we have some objectives. First of all, to describe the 3 layers of tissue in the heart wall, and to describe the location and structure of those 3 layers. And so let's look at that. So we have 2 sides of the heart, the right and the left, and we have some valves that are connecting the upper and lower chambers of the heart. And then the blood is also going to circulate through the heart muscle itself, as well as systemically to the entire body. And we'll also look at, as I said, the cardiac cycle, the heart's conduction system, and how the heart rate is regulated with the autonomic nervous system. We'll define some of the terms in relation to the heart rate, and we'll look at what are the normal sounds when you are listening to the heart through a stethoscope, and as well as some abnormal sounds that are caused by a murmur. We will not be looking at heart disease, nor will we be looking at the effects of aging. So in terms of the structure of the heart, the heart itself is made up of 3 tissue layers, and they have a particular location as to whether or not it's on the outer surface, in the middle, or close to the heart itself. So when we look at the heart is going to provide a one-way circuit for transporting blood from the heart to the rest of the circulatory system. Where is the heart located? It's located in the center of the chest, between the lungs, in an area that's known as the mediastinum. So it's in the midline of the body. The heart is pointed more towards the left side of the body. And if you look here, this section in here, the midline, is the mediastinum, and this is the heart itself. If you check here, the apex of the heart is pointing to the left side of the body. The base of the heart itself is around the bottom. Around the outside of the heart is a lining, which is known as the pericardium. This pericardium, if you notice, it is folding back on itself, and it is connecting to the lungs as well as to the diaphragm. So we have several layers, 3 of which are connected to the heart. The endocardium is the one that is lining the interior of the heart, the inside chambers. The pericardium is the thickest layer of the heart and is the heart muscle. Then the epicardium is around the outside of the heart. So if we look here, the layer of the heart wall, which is the thickest, would be the myocardium here. Around the outside of the heart is this fibrous pericardium, which is a sac that encloses the entire heart. On the innermost portion of that pericardium is the parietal layer, and then you have a area that is a space between the pericardium and the heart wall itself, and they call that the pericardial cavity. Then lining next to the heart is the visceral pericardium. So these layers, the visceral pericardium, the pericardial cavity, and then the parietal pericardium, which is on the outside under the fibrous pericardial sac, is known as the serous pericardium. And again, the heart wall is made up of the outer layer, which is the attached to the heart itself. So it's visceral, it's attached to the viscera, to that organ. And so that's the epicardium. And then we have the myocardium, which is the thickest muscle layer. And then on the inside is the endocardium. So the pericardium is the sac that encloses the whole heart. It has an outer layer, as I said, that it's made up of a fibrous pericardium, and it holds that heart in place. Then you have the serous pericardium beneath that, which is made up of the parietal layer, which is fused to the sac or to the pericardium. And then you have the epicardium, which is around the heart, and it's fused to the myocardium, which is that heart muscle. And then you have the pericardial cavity, which is the space between those two layers. So if you go back and you look here again, you have the pericardial cavity, which is between the visceral and the parietal pericardium. And then along the outside is the sac, which is the fibrous pericardium. The heart itself, as I said, is made up of the outer layer, which is called the epicardium, the inner layer, which is the heart muscle, which is the myocardium, then the endocardium, which lines those individual spaces of the atria and the ventricles. So when we look at the myocardium, that heart muscle, it is made up of striated, striated muscle cells, and those striations are actually from actin and myosin proteins that are overlapping each other. The myocardium cells only have one nucleus as compared to the skeletal muscle cells, which have multiple nuclei. The muscle cells themselves are controlled involuntarily. We don't have to think about our heart pumping. It does it on its own. And then we also have these things that are called intercalated discs, and they're actually modified plasma membranes, and they're firmly attached to each other, to the cells. And it allows for the quick conduction of electrical impulses from one cell to the next. So it allows for rapid and coordinated communication between those cells. And then we also have some branching fibers, and those branching fibers are interwoven so that the contraction itself of one fiber results in a contraction of all of those muscle fibers. So here, if you look at this microscopic view of a cardiac muscle tissue, you'll note here that you have the striations, which are actin and myosin. Then you have these intercalated discs, and those intercalated discs are, again, they're plasma membranes that are attaching the adjacent cells together, and then you have single nuclei for each one of those cells. When we look at the structure of the heart, we're going to be comparing the functions of the right and the left chambers, and those right and left chambers are separated not only from each other by a septum, by a wall, but they are also separated. The upper portion of the heart, the atria, are separated from the bottom portion of the heart, which are the ventricles. And then we'll look at how blood is circulating through the heart muscle cells themselves. So the heart is a double pump. It has its right and left sides. The right side is going to pump blood that is low in oxygen, that is returning from the systemic circuit through from the whole body back to the heart, and then be pumped through the pulmonary circuit to the lungs, then go from the lungs back into the left side of the heart, and then get pumped back out to the whole body. So the right side of the heart pumps the blood that's low in oxygen, that's returning from the circulatory system to the lungs via a circuit that's called the pulmonary circuit. And then the left side of the heart is going to receive that oxygenated blood that is being received from the lungs, and it's going to pump all of that back out through the systemic circuit to the rest of the body. The heart itself is made up of 4 chambers. The right atrium is going to receive that deoxygenated blood that's returning from the body through the superior vena cava, which is draining the head, the neck, and the arms, and the inferior vena cava, which is receiving blood from the trunk of the body and the lower limbs. The other upper portion of the heart is called the left atrium, and that receives the blood that has been pumped from the right atrium out to the lungs, and it's going to pump it back from the lungs to the left atrium, and it will be high in oxygen. And then that blood that's in the top portion of the heart is going to be pumped through some valves to the right ventricle and to the left ventricle. The right ventricle is going to pump the blood that's being received from the vena cava, from the draining of the veins of the superior and inferior vena cava to the lungs. And then the left ventricle will be receiving that blood from the lungs, and which will be oxygenated, and then it gets pumped out through the aorta to the rest of the body. So if we look here at the heart and all of the great great blood vessels. This is the superior vena cava, which is receiving blood from the head and the neck and the arms, and then the inferior vena cava, which is receiving the blood back from the trunk of the body and the lower limbs. And all of this is deoxygenated blood, so it's appears in this diagram as being colored blue, meaning that it does not have any oxygen within it. So all of this blood is coming into the upper chamber of the right atria. And then when the blood is then pumped, or a contraction occurs in that right atrium, it's going to pump that blood to the right ventricle through a valve, and then out to the pulmonary arteries and on both sides, the right and the left side, to go to the lungs to receive some oxygen. Then what happens is that blood, after it goes to the lungs, is going to come back to the heart to get pumped to the rest of the body, because now it has oxygen. So these veins, the left and the right pulmonary veins, are receiving that oxygenated blood, which is pictured here in red to denote that it has some oxygen attached to the red blood cells, and it gets pumped into the left atria, and then that left atria will contract, and then the blood will flow into the left ventricle, and then it gets pumped out and goes to the aorta. And all of that blood is then sent to the systemic circuit out to the rest of the body. Okay, so just to kind of recap here, we have 4 valves that are separating the atria and the ventricles, as well as those that are going out to the pulmonary circuit. So those 4 valves are the atrioventricular valves, which are, atrio means the atrium, and ventricular means the ventricle. So those valves are separating and connecting as well the atrium and the ventricles, both the right and the left side. And then we have valves that are used for exiting of the blood from the ventricles, and those are called the semilunar valves. You have those that are removing the blood and sending it out to the lungs, which are the pulmonary valves, and then the aortic valves, and these are found in the ventricles. The right atrioventricle valve is known as the tricuspid valve because it has 3 little flaps. The left atrioventricular valve is also known as the mitral valve, and it only has 2, and that's called the bicuspid valves. So let's kind of look here at this figure. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the valves from a superior view above, and from the posterior view. So here you have 3 cusps, 3 divisions, 1, 2, and 3. So this would be the tricuspid valve, which is also known as the pulmonary valve. And then we have the aortic valve here, okay, and that is going out to the aorta. There are tiny fibers that are pulling on these valves to open and shut, and that's known as the chordae tendineae. So this is what it looks like when the ventricles, the bottom portion of the heart, is relaxed. So these valves are closed. Then when the valves are open during a contraction and blood is being pushed through, this is what it looks like. So it pulls them open. Okay. So again, how many cusps does the right AV valve have? So that would be the right AV valve would have 3 cusps and the left would have 2. When we look at the blood supply to the heart itself, it's being supplied by coronary arteries and veins. The 2 major arteries are the right coronary artery and the left. And then, of course, we have those that are sending the blood back to the heart, and those are the cardiac veins. So if you look here, the blood itself is being sent to the pulmonary circuit via the pulmonary arteries out to the lungs, and then it returns back to the heart by the pulmonary veins. And then the systemic circuit is sending all of the blood, once it's oxygenated, out through the aorta and then to the rest of the body. But then we have to have a means by which we supply the heart itself with some blood. And if you look here, coming from here, this is the aorta. So this would be blood that has been oxygenated, and it's being sent out to the rest of the system, to the systemic circuit, to the rest of the body. Well, some of that blood is going to actually leave by means of the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery, and it's branching off of this aortic arch, and it's going to supply the blood to the myocardium itself. Then the blood is going to return to the heart by means of the great coronary vein, which leads into this largest area called the coronary sinus, and then it's going to return to the heart by means of the right atrium. Okay. So when we look at the opening of those coronary arteries, blood is flowing through when the ventricles contract and that aortic valve is open. That will allow for the blood then to enter into the right coronary artery and the left coronary artery. When the heart muscle is going to relax, well, then those valves are closed. And when the valves are closed, then the blood can't backflow into those coronary arteries and veins. So some of the things that we need to kind of recap here: the names of the innermost, middle, and outermost layers of the heart wall. That would be the epicardium, okay, the myocardium, and the endocardium. And then the name of the sac that encloses the heart is the pericardium. And then the upper receiving chamber on each side of the heart, and the lower chambers. The upper ones would be the atria. The lower pumping chambers are the ventricles, and the valves the purpose of them are to regulate the flow of the blood through the heart. And then the system that supplies the blood to the heart muscle itself, or the myocardium, is the cardiac is the coronary circulation. Okay, so next we're going to look at the function of the heart and to describe the cardiac cycle, and locate the components of that conduction system. We'll look at the effects of the autonomic nervous system on heart rate, and then we'll list and define some terms that are related to heart rate, and then determine and understand about normal as well as unusual heart sounds. So the cardiac cycle is a series of events that occur in the heart during one heartbeat. When a heart contracts, it's known as systole. When the heart is at rest, it is known as diastole. So one cardiac cycle would consist of the atria, the top portion of the heart, contracting, and that would open up this valve between the right atria and the right ventricle, which is the atrioventricular valve. On the right side, it is the tricuspid valve, and it allows for blood to flow from the right atria to the right ventricle. At the same time, blood is undergoing systole on the left side, and it is pumping blood through from the left atria to the left ventricle, and it's opening up the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve, and then the atria are relaxed, so they are in systole, and then the ventricles are going to contract. The right ventricle is going to pump blood through the pulmonary valve to the pulmonary right and left pulmonary arteries to the lungs. At the same time, the left atria has relaxed, and the left ventricle is contracting, so it's in systole, and it is sending blood out to the aorta to the rest of the body. And then the whole heart then takes a moment and it's in diastole while the atria fill back up. So the heart is relaxed, blood is being returned to the heart, it's filling the atria. And then again, this will go through another cycle. So when the ventricles contract, what valves are closed and what valves are open? So if you look at this, the valves at the time that the ventricles are contracting, these ventricles are contracting. So what valves are closed? These would be the atrioventricular valve between the right atrium and the right ventricle is closed. What is open is the pulmonary valve. Okay. Here, the left atrioventricular valve is closed, or the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve, and then here that the atrioventricular or the aortic valve is open and allowing for blood to go into the aorta. Okay. When we measure cardiac output, it is determined by the volume of blood that's pumped by the heart per minute. It consists of two parts, the stroke volume and the heart rate. The stroke volume is the volume of blood pumped by the heart per heartbeat. And then the heart rate is the number of heartbeats per minute. So to get the cardiac output, you would take the volume of blood pumped by the heart per heartbeat, which is the stroke volume, and multiply it by the heart rate, which is measured in minutes. Now, in order for the heart to contract and relax, we need a electrical stimulation, and that cardiac muscle has to be electrically stimulated. We have some nodes that are responsible for conducting that electrical impulse through the heart itself. They consist of the sinoatrial node, which is located up in the right atrium and is known as the pacemaker. Then we have these nodes, which are called the internodal pathway, the atrioventricular node, and one that is actually a series of long fibers, which we call the bundle of His, and then these conduction myofibers, which are Purkinje fibers, and all of this is like a circuit to regulate the heart contracting. So here we have in the right atria, we have that sinoatrial node, which is known as the pacemaker. And if you note, it has a series of fibers. And then here between the septum of the right and left atria, and here between that, going out to the pulmonary circuit, we have the atrioventricular node that leads to the bundle of His here, which is in the septum between the right and the left ventricles, and then it actually encircles the entire area of both the right and the left ventricles. So these are the Purkinje fibers here, and all of that just sends the electrical conduction throughout the heart, and it allows for the heart to contract. When we are excited or we have this fight and flight response, our autonomic nervous system is going to kick in because of our changing needs, and that we have to rapidly respond to those. So it allows for the sympathetic nervous system to speed up our heart rate, and then once we are out of danger or no longer anxious, our parasympathetic system kicks in and it slows down our heart rate. Also, there are some hormones that are circulating that allow for the regulation of the heart rate, and that's epinephrine, which is going to speed up the heart, and then thyroxine as well. All of this is controlled, as I said, through the autonomic nervous system, through the parasympathetic system, and it comes from one of the cranial nerves, and it is the vagus nerve. There are a couple of things that are defining some variations in heart rate. Bradycardia is a very slow heart rate that's less than 60 beats per minute, and tachycardia is more than 100 beats per minute, so that's very, very hard. And then a sinus arrhythmia is just a regular variation in the heart rate. It can be caused by changes in the or it can cause changes in the rate and depth of our breathing as well. Then a premature beat, which is an extrasystole, is a beat that comes before the expected normal beat. And in healthy people, that premature beat may be initiated by such things as caffeine or nicotine or even psychological stress. So now when we are listening to a heart, we have some heart sounds. The normal heart sounds are a lub-dub, and those are initiated based upon what's going on in the heart at the time. The lub is a longer, lower pitch sound that occurs at the start of ventricular systole, and it's caused by mainly by the closure of the atrioventricular valve, and then that causes a vibration when the blood passes through the valves and into the tissues that are surrounding the valves. Now the dub is a shorter and much sharper sound, and it occurs at the beginning of the ventricular relaxation, and is caused by the sudden closure of those semilunar valves that are leading to the pulmonary circuit or out through the aorta. We have some abnormal sounds, which are an organic murmur, and that's just a change in the heart rate, it's due to a change in the heart rate due to the vessels that are abnormally structured, maybe to a birth defect. A functional murmur is just a normal sound that is working, but it may be described as a murmur because it might be due to the rapid filling of those ventricles, but it's a normal sound. So what's the name that's given to the contraction phase of the cardiac cycle? And of course, that would be systole. To the relaxation is diastole. What is the cardiac output? And remember that is determined by two things: the heart rate multiplied by the stroke volume. And then what's the scientific name for the heart's pacemaker? That's the sinoatrial valve node. And then the system that exerts the main influence on the rate and the strength of the heart contractions, that is the conduction system. And a heart murmur, again, is an abnormal sound. Okay, we're not going to look at the heart studies, nor into heart disease, nor aging. So that concludes chapter 14, which is dealing with the heart. Okay. Make sure that you do the chapter objectives and look at the study guide for chapter 14.